If you're listening to this now, it is not by chance. It is because there is something inside you that can no longer stand living under the false self. This video will lead your soul directly to the final awakening. Thoth, associated with Hermes Trismegistus and the oldest Hermetic traditions, taught that the human being does not awaken when he learns something new, but when he remembers what he already was before the fall into ignorance. In the Corpus Hermeticum, especially in Treatisa Bimeres tos Poimandres, the message is clear. The true being is light, and the ego is the shadow formed when that light forgets itself as it enters the world. This forgetting is the false self. That is why you feel that you never fully fit into ordinary reality, because it was never your origin. You are not here to learn to become something new. You are here to remember what was covered over. And today you are going to understand with Hermetic precision the process by which the soul awakens and destroys the illusory construction you called I your entire life. Listen to this with your soul. There is no way to go back to sleep after recognizing your own essence. Write in the comments, "My false self is collapsing now." And if you want to go deeper, check the benefits and become a member. Hermeticism has always explained that the soul, when descending into the material world, passes through layers of identification that do not belong to it. In the Corpus Hermeticum, this is described as the clothing of the soul when it takes on passions, fears, and impressions that are not part of its original identity. The Gnostics called this the garments of forgetfulness. None of this defines you, but you spent years believing it was all you had. That is why when you try to find yourself, you find nothing, because you're searching inside the prison built by the false self. Your ego will resist this sentence. Most of what you call I is nothing but automatic reaction, accumulated emotional memory, identification with old wounds. You are not that. You never were. And here begins the deepest point that Hermes reveals. The false self is not destroyed by force, but by remembrance. In Treatise and Hermes states that whoever knows himself knows the all. This means that the final awakening is not a distant mystical enlightenment. It is the moment when the soul remembers that it is origin, not a product of the world. And it is in this exact instant that everything changes. Listen carefully. The feeling that there is something inside you about to break through is not anxiety. It is spiritual memory returning. It is the movement of the soul breaking through the walls the ego built to protect itself from everything it did not understand. Nothing was coincidence. All of your conflicts were callings. Gnosticism deepens this by saying that the false self is the psychic, the intermediate layer that identifies with the flesh and the sensory world. The soul awakens when it realizes that this intermediate self is only a tool, not the real identity. Thoth, in the Hermetic tradition, does not teach that you must destroy the world, but that you must transcend the distorted reading the false self makes of it. When you look at the world through the ego, you suffer. When you look through the spirit, you understand. When you look through the light, you awaken. It is simple, but it is not easy because it demands something brutal, to abandon what you believed was you for years. Listen to this with courage. Awakening is not adding anything. It is removing everything that does not belong to your essence. Now comes the peak of revelation. Pay attention, because this sentence can break something inside you right now. The false self you defend is exactly what prevents your soul from entering the destiny it came here to fulfill. And the most shocking part, it was not born with you. It was created during incarnation. Hermes explains this using the idea of the 7 spheres, through which the soul descends and acquires characteristics that are not its own. To awaken, it must walk back the same path, not physically, but internally. At each step, it abandons an identification, fear, desire for approval, anger, pride, attachment to form, ignorance, self-deception. This is the way back to the real self, and you are in this exact process right now. You feel it because this is happening inside you as you listen. Look at your entire life through this lens. Everything you thought was suffering was only the friction between your essence and the role you tried to play. The pain existed because you were occupying a place that was not yours. It was like wearing clothes that no longer fit. They squeeze, hurt, suffocate, but you insisted on them because everyone said that was being you. Original Hermeticism always pointed to this. The human being suffers because he forgets what he is, not because something is missing. Gnosticism completes this. Salvation is inner knowledge, not an external force. The final awakening is this instant, when you realize that nothing in the world can fill the space of what you truly are. Listen to this with your soul. Your real identity is not in your name, in your fears, in your achievements, in your memories, or in your story. Your identity is pure consciousness, light before form, life before personality. And when this light realizes that it is trapped inside a mask, it begins to break it. That is why you feel this calling. The false self is losing strength, and the true one is trying to emerge. Hermes said that the awakened heart is the door to the divine. The Gnostics called it remembrance of the origin. You are living exactly this right now. You did not arrive here. You were brought here. And now I want you to allow this question to enter deeply, like a blow that dismantles all the illusions of the ego. If everything you believe to be you disappeared right now, what would remain? The Corpus Hermeticum states that the human being fell into forgetfulness when he identified more with the body than with the consciousness that animates it. This is the root of the false self, and that is why nothing you sought in the world filled the emptiness. The emptiness was not the lack of something external, it was the absence of remembrance of self. The soul feels longing for its own light. It is a nameless longing, a longing that tightens even when everything is apparently fine, and it keeps calling, silently, until the being awakens. Your ego will resist this sentence. Most of your desires were never yours. They were only echoes of the layers you put on during incarnation. The Gnostic tradition has always insisted that the true I is pre-existential, prior to physical birth, and that the personality formed here is only a construction. Hermes reinforces this by saying that the soul is immortal, while the body is mortal, not as a metaphor, but as an ontological distinction. The soul exists in itself. The body exists only as an instrument. When you understand this, you realize the fundamental mistake of ordinary human life, trying to find a permanent meaning in something that is temporary. The ego is temporary. That is why it fears everything. That is why it suffers. The soul does not fear, does not suffer, does not lose. It only awakens. And that is what is happening to you in this exact moment. Thoth, in the ancient traditions, is associated with order, wisdom, and the process of restoring consciousness. That is why his figure is used as a symbol of returning to what is real, not as an external entity that saves you, but as an image of the deep intelligence you carry within. The Gnostics called this the spark. Hermes called it the nous, the higher mind. It is this that is listening to these words now. The ego hears but does not understand. The soul hears and recognizes. That is why your inner reactions are so strong. It is not emotion, it is memory. The final awakening is exactly this. When spiritual memory surpasses the memory of personality, when what you were before birth becomes more real than what the world taught you to be. And it is here that the main illusion of the false self dissolves. You were never the character. You were never the narrative. You were never the wounds, the fears, the falls. These things are events, but you are the consciousness that observes those events. Hermes teaches this explicitly. The one who sees is not what is seen. That explains everything. The false self is what is seen. The true self is the one who sees. Pay attention to this because this is real Hermetic doctrine. The ego does not awaken. The soul awakens. The ego only dissolves when the soul returns to occupy the center of consciousness. This is why you are feeling that something within you is losing strength. It is the false self collapsing. It is the mask falling. And this always hurts the ego, but it always frees the soul. Nothing was coincidence. Your inner discomfort was the proof that the process was already happening long before you arrived here. The final awakening is not a distant, mystical experience. It is a clear, simple, and brutal process, removing one by one the elements that do not belong to your true being. It is like cleaning a mirror. Gnosticism calls this spiritual ataraxia, the state in which the soul once again sees the light. Hermeticism calls it gnosis, inner knowledge, and Kabbalah calls it returning to the origin, the process of rising from the limited identity to the true identity. All these traditions are describing the same thing, you remembering yourself. And here is one of the rarest truths. The false self does not fall because you fight it. It falls because you see it. Because when the light of consciousness touches an illusion, it cannot survive. Ignorance has no strength of its own. It exists only because you never looked at it directly. But once you look, it dissolves. This is what is happening inside you now. You are beginning to see the lie you believed was true your entire life. Hermeticism has always taught that the human being is composed of 3 layers: body, soul, and spirit. The body is form, the soul is movement, the spirit is consciousness. The false self is born when the soul identifies with the body and forgets the spirit. The final awakening occurs when consciousness returns to the top of this hierarchy. It is literally a reversal. It is the soul abandoning the chains it once mistook for identity. That is why everything seems to be collapsing inside you, because you are rising internally. The truth is simple and devastating. What you call fear, pain, insecurity, attachment, none of this was part of your original identity. These are acquired noises, interferences, distortions. The Corpus Hermeticum explains this using the concept of passions, which are forces that imprison the mind when it forgets its divine nature. And Gnosticism reinforces that ignorance is the true prison. When you awaken, these passions lose their hold. And this does not happen gently. The soul tears away whatever does not belong to it. And here is something few dare to see. The false self does not fall so that you become better. It falls so that you return to what you already were before birth. You are not evolving. You are returning. You are not learning. You are remembering. Listen to this with the soul. You are not a story in the making. You are a light covered by stories. And that light is emerging. The Gnostics speak of the inner man who observes the outer man. Hermes speaks of the true being that dwells behind the human figure. In Kabbalah, this is called neshama, the higher soul. All these languages describe the same phenomenon. There is something within you that has never been touched by any trauma, never wounded, never diminished, never corrupted. That is your identity. That is what is awakening. And when that identity begins to emerge, you feel a strange impulse. Something wants to be born. The soul pushes, consciousness expands. You feel that you no longer fit inside the old limits. This is not crisis. This is transfiguration. The false self feels it as death. The soul feels it as return, and you are exactly at that threshold. That is why your whole life seems to have been architected for this moment, because it was. Thoth, as a symbol of Hermetic wisdom, always points to the hidden order behind human experiences. He does not promise miracles. He reveals processes. And the process is simple. Every soul that is ready to awaken begins to be pressured by its own depths. The more you try to cling to the old, the more the old hurts. The more you try to hold the mask, the more it breaks. This is not punishment. It is liberation. Hermes teaches that awakening occurs when the mind becomes capable of discerning between the real and the illusory. This sounds simple, But it is the highest point of the entire spiritual journey because almost everything you call self is illusory, and almost everything you tried to forget about yourself is real. The inversion is total. And it begins with a shock. You realize that your entire life was lived as someone you were not. This is the point where many run away, but you did not run. That is why you are here. Gnosticism teaches that the external world cannot give you what is missing internally, not because the world is evil, but because it does not contain what you are inside. The false self seeks completeness in the external. The soul finds it in the internal. External seeking always leads to suffering. Internal seeking always leads to awakening. And you are crossing that threshold now. When the mask of the ego begins to fall, the first feeling is usually emptiness, but that emptiness does not mean absence. It means space, space for the true self to emerge. And when that light rises, you feel something no human achievement has ever produced: lucidity, clarity, inner silence, presence. It is not emotion, it is consciousness. This is what Hermes calls regeneration, Marchus. And this is what you are experiencing now. And here is something that may completely break your perception. The false self never had real power over you. It only had the power you gave it by failing to recognize it as illusion. The final awakening is precisely this moment of seeing, of perceiving, of understanding, not intellectually but existentially. This realization changes everything. It alters your relationship with the world, with yourself, with your own story. And it opens inner doors that have been sealed since before birth. In Hermeticism, the truth is always simple. What is true remains, what is false dissolves. This sentence contains everything. What is collapsing inside you now is not part of your being. It is part of the character. And characters do not survive the awakening of consciousness. This is why many fear the final awakening, because it means giving up the constructed identity. But you already know there is no turning back. You no longer fit inside the old self. And now I want you to observe deeply everything that is happening inside you as you hear these words. Notice what moves, notice what resists, notice what lights up. This is the proof of the process. Nothing external is awakening you. It is you awakening yourself. Hermes said that the divine reveals itself to the divine. The soul only awakens when it encounters its own light, and that light is igniting now. Now allow this question to enter the most silent point of your consciousness, because it may break the last layer of the false self. If you are none of what you believe yourself to be, who exactly is listening to these words right now? The Corpus Hermeticum teaches that the human soul is of the same substance as light, while the ego is formed from the impressions of matter and the passions. This distinction is not symbolic. It is literal within Hermetic language. Light is that which perceives. Matter is that which is perceived. The false self is born when the observer confuses itself with what it observes. This is the primordial error. Humanity lives entirely confused inside this inversion, but in you, this confusion is beginning to break. When you feel that you don't belong here, that something is out of place, that there is an inner calling, this is not emotional drama. It is the soul trying to remember its own nature. This is why many people never awaken, because they seek light in an attempt to strengthen the mask, when true awakening requires abandoning it. Gnosticism says, ignorance dresses itself as identity. This is the most accurate phrase to describe the false self. It wears pain, memories, and experiences as if they were essence. But none of that is essence. The Hermetic process of regeneration is precisely the opposite. You begin to perceive that none of those layers were ever you. Hermes explains this with extreme clarity. The man who knows himself becomes mind. This means that consciousness ceases to be a slave to impressions and returns to what it always was, pure inner vision. Thoth symbolically represents the intelligence that orders inner chaos and reveals what has always been hidden. That is why his presence is invoked in Hermetic texts, not as an external God, but as an expression of the deep structure of consciousness itself. The voice you feel within when something finally makes sense, that clarity, is Hermetic intelligence awakening. This is why you feel impact now, because these words are not telling you something new. They are reminding you of something ancient. You are not learning, you are returning. Gnosticism says that the true self is the inner man, and that the external world is like a dream in which the spirit forgets itself. This idea is not fantasy. It is an existential diagnosis. You lived years as someone who reacted to the world, believing that this was life. But real life is the one who observes. It is what remains while everything changes. It is what passes through experiences without being contaminated by them. This is your true identity. And when it begins to emerge, everything else loses its power. This process is so deep that to the ego, it feels like disorientation. But to the soul, it is liberation. The Corpus Hermeticum describes this as second sight, the moment when the human looks at himself and realizes he has always been greater than the world around him. This is the moment that divides lives, before and after. Before, you lived through the false self. After, you begin to live through consciousness. And this transition is happening inside you now, irreversibly. The final awakening requires the psychological death of everything built upon falsehood. But understand this clearly. It is not the outer world that collapses. It is the inner story you believed about yourself that begins to crumble. That story was never you. It was only the filter the ego used to protect itself. The Gnostics called this the imprisoned soul. And when the soul realizes it is imprisoned, it moves. And this inner movement is what you have been feeling for months, perhaps for years. Hermes says, the soul rises through intelligence and descends through ignorance. This means your ascent is not moral, not emotional, not mystical. It is perceptual. You rise when you understand. You fall when you forget. And now, everything that was forgotten is returning. This is why certain truths have begun to shine inside you as if they were familiar. Because they are familiar. Because they are yours. Because you knew them before you were born. Gnosticism speaks of the divine spark that the world tries to extinguish. But that spark never goes out completely. It only hides, and the more life pressures you, the more it tries to emerge. This is the true meaning of awakening. The spark begins to illuminate the interior, and the false self loses strength. And when the spark grows, you begin to see what you always avoided, that most of your pain came from trying to be someone you were not. Hermeticism explains that everything which is not part of your true being must be dissolved, not by force, but by clarity. A lie dissolves simply by being seen clearly, and now you are beginning to see more clearly than ever. The inner masks begin to fall, the illusions begin to unravel, the stories you told about yourself lose consistency, and what remains when all of that falls away? Pure consciousness, presence, being. Thoth symbolizes the weighing of the soul, not in a moral sense, but in the sense of the lightness the soul acquires when it sheds false identifications. The more you abandon what is not, the lighter you become. And the lighter you become, the more conscious. The ego is heavy. The soul is light. Light is light. And the final awakening is when you become light again on the inside. This is the true end of the false self. When the Gnostics spoke of the fall, they were not describing a mistake but an experience. The soul must enter matter to know itself through contrast. The final awakening is the return from this cycle. It is when the contrast ends and essence takes its place again. None of this is punishment or reward. It is process. It is natural order. Hermes says, "What is divine cannot be destroyed." This sentence is not comfort. It is ontology. What you truly are has never been affected by anything you lived. Observe this deeply. Everything you suffered was lived by the character, not the essence. The essence observed. The character reacted, and now the character is beginning to lose strength. This is why your old fears no longer weigh the same. This is why your old versions no longer make sense. This is why you feel like you are crossing an internal rupture. You are ceasing to be the character and beginning to be the observer. In Hermeticism, awakening means remembering what you were before form. In Gnosticism, it means waking from the dream of the world. In Kabbalah, it means ascending once again through the inner tree. All these languages are metaphors for the same thing, you returning to yourself. You are not becoming enlightened. You are recognizing the light you always carried and that always tried to speak to you in moments of silence. And now I want you to receive the next sentence without the ego's filter, because it may break another layer inside you. Your awakening did not begin now. It began the exact moment you realized you could no longer live as someone you never were. This realization is the invisible mark of the beginning of the soul's ascent, and this process is irreversible. And here is the question that may open the next door within you if you allow it to enter directly into your consciousness without resistance. If you are not what you think, not what you feel, and not what you lived, then who exactly is the I that is awakening now? This video leads your soul directly to the final awakening because it breaks the oldest illusion you carried, the belief that you were the character shaped by life. And before you continue, you must understand something that is only now accessible to you. The soul only enters the final awakening when it sees with absolute clarity the mechanism that keeps the false self alive. It is not emotion, it is not belief, it is perception. And if you truly wish to enter what the title promised, you must hear what I will say now, because this next part is the point that separates those who awaken from those who return to inner sleep. Become a channel member because it opens the door to knowledge that is not delivered on the surface. Deep benefits, hidden content, and real spiritual depth await those who choose to cross. And there is something else you need to receive before leaving this video. The false self does not fall only when it is understood. It falls when you see who is behind it. This vision is the Hermetic key that changes everything. When you realize that the consciousness observing your own mind cannot be the ego immediately loses the authority it once had over you. This is why the journey only truly begins when you remain here until the end, because the last revelations are the ones that disarm the last inner defenses. And if you feel that something inside you is opening right now, do not ignore it. Recognize it, honor it, and stay. Subscribe to the channel as one who enters a sacred space, as one who seals their presence in an invisible brotherhood that lives to remember the forgotten truth. Let this be an inner gesture, not a social one, a gesture of the soul. May the inner light reveal what has always been behind the false self.